Hi, everyone. My name is Alice Kim, and on behalf of FAU Thrive, we would like to welcome you to this conversation, where we sat down with Dr. Iglesias, a psychologist and FAU alumnus who is actively teaching on the FAU Jupiter campus, is involved in research, and maintains a private practice in Palm Beach Gardens. In this discussion, we talked about the importance of mental health and the resources available to support our community. Dr. Iglesias brought both his expertise and compassion as he offers us insights into how to better guide and take care of ourselves as well as one another. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Okay, we're good.
Okay. Hello, Dr. Iglesias. We're all very happy to have you here for this interview. This is very exciting. Um, and just to start off, can you explain a little bit about yourself, like your background, in psychology and like throughout your like schooling, as well as your current work and anything else that you think might be important to let us know a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, my background on a kind of on a personal level is while born and raised in the U.S. and raised in South Florida, my roots originate from a Cuban family, and so my grandparents and parents are originally from Cuba, and I was very much raised in that tradition, speaking only Spanish at home, entering into formal schooling, not knowing English, and abiding by uh, traditions and routines and norms that are predicated on our our home country and our home culture. And kind of coming full circle, that's the way in which we are raising our children. And so I can proudly say that my children, ages 4, 2, and baby, do not speak English, because we want to inculcate the importance of Spanish and the importance of that cultural element. Um, so as it relates to on a personal kind of front, that's the framework that I was raised in culturally. And then there's the importance uh, of being a professional, and a person of that's educated. But both of my parents are working professionals. My father's a psychologist, and my mother's a school teacher, and both have advanced degrees. And I think those things were factors that were again integrated into who I am, and things that as a family we valued, and that's something that I pursued. And so, kind of fast forward to my time to enter college. I was fortunate enough to attend the Honors College, and I'm a graduate of the Honors College. And during my time here, I thought that I was going to be a dentist. I thought I was going to go into dental school and follow my grandfather's footsteps, and started to do volunteer work with dentists, and realized that I didn't want to look inside people's mouths for the rest of my life. And so I then always naturally gravitated towards psychology curriculum, psychology courses. It always kind of came natural to me. There was the influence of my father, and so I pursued that. And I got my undergraduate here at the Honors College in psychology with a minor in Spanish, and needed more time to sort out what was for me. And so I continued to do internship work, volunteer work, with my father, as well as with a psychiatrist in his practice, and then pursued a master's degree in experimental psychology. The two professors here at FAU that were instrumental and as psychologists to me were Dr. Earls. She was my advisor as an undergraduate, and then Dr. Kirsten, her husband. Both were my advisors through undergraduate as well as my master's work. Once I made the decision to pursue the Ph.D., I knew that I wanted training that would allow for me to be trained as a scientist, but also to be able to do clinical work. And so I was granted admission to the PhD program in clinical psychology at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I completed my doctoral work there, and completed my internship at a child psychiatric hospital, the Virginia Treatment Center for Children, which is housed at the teaching hospital there at VCU. And I think in general that rounds out kind of my educational and professional training kind of foundation as a psychologist, and I get to use it in a private practice setting as well as being able to do research and teach here at the Honors College.
Thank you, thank you. And I know I heard you mention your time at the Virginia Commonwealth University as well as the Virginia Treatment Center for Children. Do you mind expanding on like your experiences at both the Virginia Commonwealth University and the Treatment Center for Children in your time at the Ph.D. program?
Absolutely. If you asked me why I attended VCU, the honest answer is because that's where I got in. I applied to approximately 15 PhD programs in clinical and counseling psych. And in the final analysis, I was waitlisted at VCU, Notre Dame, and Indiana University. And thankfully, the student ahead of me at VCU that was selected ahead of me opted to go elsewhere. And so I was able to match with, I think, the professor that was the best fit for me, somebody with similar background to me at VCU, was granted admission into that program. And I really think it was the perfect fit in as much as that I was in a program that was a PhD in clinical psych with a concentration on child and adolescent, with children and adolescents. And the cool thing about the program was that I was able to delve into that area both in terms of research, evaluation, and treatment, while also overlapping with the counseling psychology program at VCU. And so, to their credit, they allowed for sort of an intermingling between both programs, and I think it allowed to round out both formal coursework as well as exposure to psychologists from different walks of life. So in any given semester, I was taking classes, doing research, doing individual consultation with private practice psychologists, counseling psychologists, clinical psychologists, some that were more research oriented, some that were more clinical oriented. And so it really offered me an expansive sort of set of experiences with different kind of psychologists that help inform who I am. It really informed who I didn't want to be because there was just so much one-on-one contact with the faculty that you really got to learn what kind of psychologist, what kind of way you wanted to work, and what kind of way you didn't want to work. And an extension of that was the internship at the Virginia Treatment Center for Children. I had completed a practicum there prior to internship, and it really was a nice fit where it's an inpatient psychiatric hospital within the larger teaching hospital at VCU, and it was all things inpatient related care. So patients that tended to have a kind of more severe forms of pathology, they tended to be there for whether it was reasons of self-harm or psychosis or severe mood disorders or homicidal ideation or homicidal acts. And so it really allowed me to plunge into the deep end of the pool and work in an intensive and extreme sort of setting with, again, a team of psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers, et cetera, in a multidisciplinary setting, and to really have a traditional multidisciplinary experience within a teaching hospital.
Thank you for sharing that. So, I mean, I've taken your class before and you've talked about your relationship to health psychology. And one thing that stood out to me when you were talking about your experiences at the Virginia Commonwealth University and at the Virginia Treatment Center for Children is the multifaceted approach that you had there. So before I ask my next question, how would you classify yourself, if any classification, in terms of being a psychologist, i.e., clinical psychologist, health psychologist, etc.?
I think I'm a clinical psychologist that while trained as a scientist and as a researcher, I think the individual whether it's patient or colleague or student that interfaces with me also hopefully senses the humanistic orientation to my work, and that certainly the empirical aspects of it are important and are foundational, but equally important, and maybe even more important, is that it be rooted in a humanistic orientation through a humanistic lens, to be able to use that as a guiding force in the way in which one works. And so my hope is that's what comes across in the way in which I teach, in the way in which I care for my patients, and in the way in which I engage with other folk in the community.
Thank you for sharing. And can you explain how you landed on that approach to clinical psychology that is more humanistic rather than empirical?
I think it found me. It certainly was the way in which my it's the way in which my father raised me, and the way in which he practices as a psychologist. Um, I think I think I kind of went full circle in as much as the program that I attended at VCU was a very heavy scientist capital S practitioner, and so really the formation was one of to be a future researcher, a future faculty member at a research university. And I stepped into that apparatus and did what researchers do, and did what clinicians that work from a strictly empirical paradigm do, which is you become an expert on the literature and apply it accordingly. And really wasn't until year two in the program that I took a counseling theories course that sort of opened my eyes to that there's a world outside of empirically oriented approaches that I think informs the other aspects of the work. And then I think connecting that with uh, my upbringing, connecting that with being able to see how my father put it into play in his practice, I think informed who I am today. And hopefully I've been able to integrate those aspects into my identity as a psychologist, and it's what's best for my patients.
Thank you again for sharing. And on the top of your patients, I know you run your own private practice. Is there anything that you specialize in your private practice, whether that be like specific groups of people? I know you mentioned your upbringing, um, speaking Spanish only from a very young age, and that being the main language. So it could be people, it could be a certain orientation, but any specialties that you think that you have within your own private practice?
I, I tend to specialize in work with evaluation and treatment of children and adolescents. Yet over the course of the last 5 years or so, what's kind of found me has been working with chronic pain patients. And so these are patients that have been injured in the work setting and are now in the workers' compensation system. And so they now comprise a significant part of my practice. And so kind of in any given day, I think it's a blend of work with children and adolescents as well as injured patients or chronic pain patients.
Okay. Well, the last question that I will have before Alice starts to ask some questions is, when you say it found you, is there an inciting incident where that sort of changed for you, or did it just happen gradually over your time in private practice?
I know definitely kind of like a moment of of insight, if you will, that really solidified for me the decision to become a psychologist was um, at the time I was a year out of undergraduate. So it was my first year in the master's program in experimental psychology, and I was still questioning what to pursue, what to do thereafter and what to pursue a PhD in. And I took a trip with my father that was clinical in nature. We went to Guatemala and Honduras to do clinical work with families that had lost their loved ones in a motor vehicle accident in this country. And so the work entailed evaluation and treatment of individuals that were grieving the loss of their loved ones. And during the course of that trip, I think working and oh, by the way, the trip was to the home countries of the families in Guatemala and Honduras, and I think things happened in that trip that just I would ascribe to the spiritual domain, and it in some way solidified for me that this was in a way my calling and what I was supposed to be doing, and to be able to help individuals that needed it, especially those on the margins, those and I think in kind of in terms of those that and in my case, they tend to be individuals that are of Hispanic background, ethnic minority backgrounds, and so I know that trip just did something in terms of really solidifying that this was the step that I needed to take. And, kind of getting off the plane after that trip, I really went full force towards the PhD programs in clinical and counseling psych. But to your original question, I don't think it was any one discrete event or thing. Rather, it just kind of almost kind of came full circle and sort of fell into place where I'm supposed to be, which is what I find in private practice is that you kind of cycle through patients, you cycle through referrals, and the consolation is that what is your sweet spot, what is your center, if you will, it kind of finds you, and so you tend to gravitate towards, I guess, maybe what you're comfortable with, what you're competent in, what you feel that you're helpful in. And I think that happened both in terms of an orientation to the way in which I practice, an orientation into the way in which I teach, as well as an orientation to the kind of patient that I tend to have or tend to see.
Thank you very much for sharing all of that.
I'm kind of curious about your professional career, so we're gonna kind of do a little shift. I know you mentioned you work in private practice, so I was wondering, is there anything that you find like extremely fulfilling regarding that aspect of your career?
As I mentioned to students in class, it's this privileged position. I mean, I don't even want to call it a job. I think people I think people that are laying brick and people that are working out in the hot sun all day and are working in construction and are working in lawn care, that's work. Those are people that are working. I think I get to be in this distinguished position where I get to perfect a craft and be welcomed into the lives of my patients, and have in a given day just have these subtle nuanced things that happen and that you're a part of, and that you get to share with patients that only you get to experience. And it's sort of like being part of the secret club, and only you as a psychologist know about it, and maybe other psychologists, I think, that experience something similar could relate to it. But really, it's this special like world that is the world of your patient, that if they welcome you in, and then subtle things happen throughout the course of a day that I think in of itself make it enriching. And it tends to be pretty ordinary in nature. It's not as sort of grandiose as one might think. It just kind of, it's ordinary, it's mundane, but it's unique. And that you're the only one that is granted that privilege to be a part of that. And it can look like it could look like being the only person that individual, that patient talks to about something, something sacred. Or in some of my patients, they're so isolated that I might be the only person they speak to in a given week. Or it could be, being able to share in the news about something, or I'm trying to think of what else. But just subtle things that are a part of the unfolding process that is being a psychologist, being with other patients, being able to observe certain things, and witness certain things that perhaps you are the only person that has that privilege. And so I think that's the enriching part of the work is it's this deeply human job. It's this deeply human experience. Um, at times it's damn complex because I think people are complex. And then sometimes it's pretty straightforward and easy, so to speak, and streamlined. Um, but all in all, it's pretty stinking cool to be able to do this.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. But like with every aspect of a career, I know there are like ups and downs, pros and cons. Is there anything difficult that you might find within private practice?
I think at every turn, if you're doing work with third party payers or insurance carriers, um, it's you're signing up for a wrestling match, and you're signing up for headaches and frustrations. And at every turn, it tends to be, whatever the situation is, it tends to benefit them and not you and or your patient. And so it's really dealing with that inherent frustration, especially when it comes down to a patient not getting the care, the services that they need in a timely fashion, and having to navigate those sorts of dynamics, as well as just kind of on a more kind of simpler like plane, as it it tends to be inherently frustrating for patients to navigate their own insurance policies, and then you as a psychologist slash doctor like to do the same. And so everybody's frustrated before they've even met each other. And so what kind of recipe is that for a patient doctor relationship? And so it's really like it's a system, that tends to start from, the starting point is there, and it's kind of you're working you're working upstream, um, as it relates to that, and you have to really name that with your patient so that they can understand that the factors outside of us, the system outside of us, is not necessarily conducive to what's in our best interest in our relationship.
I have a follow-up for that. Like, is there any particular way that you kind of handle those situations?
I complain to my students about it. Uh, um, my and then my wife complains to me about it because she's also my office. In addition to running my life, she's also my office manager. Um, but but really, it's and then I complain to when it's appropriate. I let patients know about the inherent frustration that is from my end of it, checking in on their end of it, and just kind of naming these things as they're unfolding, because they're, whether you like it or not, they're a part of it, and so you gotta deal with it one way or another.
No, yeah, I understand. Um, in your private practice, I believe Amari mentioned this to us like outside, but like you do hypnosis.
Yeah,
And I was wondering if you can kind of explain like what it is and how you like use it.
yeah. So I define hypnosis as an altered state of consciousness. It's a pretty naturally occurring state that's readily available to most folk. Um, and it's a modality that I think allows a patient and psychologist to circumvent certain defenses, certain barriers, and to be able to fast track and facilitate certain aspects of the work. Um, I tend to use it with pain management. I tend to use it with performance enhancements, whether it's for athletes or for individuals that are, looking to enhance some sort of performance related aspect of their life. I think it's beneficial in the treatment of anxiety and depression. Um, and I think it's something that at times is just kind of opportunistic. And what I mean by that is sometimes it could be to augment something for a patient if they need a tool, a quick and dirty tool, or a weapon for that matter, to be able to use for a kind of a circumscribed aspect of their life, whatever that may look like. We use it, um, and and I find it to be beneficial. I think there's a lot of potential there. I think it's really perhaps a superpower that we have just scratched the surface on.
I'm curious, how did you like come about it? When did you start using it?
It was really more of an experiential aspect of it. In sixth, when I was transitioning to middle school in sixth grade, I had terrible anxiety, and I was getting stomach aches, and I was just tense, and difficulty sleeping, and my dad taught it to me, and he one of the what you're doing, and one of the elements of hypnosis is you're promoting dissociation, which I know is kind of a frightening statement in of itself, but what you're helping a patient sometimes to do is to go to a place that has connotations of safety and protection, for the purposes of their psychological well-being. And in teaching me at the sanctuary, or the hideaway that I identified in my mind was, growing up, we would, here in South Florida, we'd go snorkeling. My dad and I would go snorkeling here at the beach, and I remember, like, that's where my mind took me to, and it had just this this serene, protected feel in my mind, and it really helped me to have something available to me every day that I used, that helped me to manage these bouts of anxiety. And so I guess you could say I became a believer, and to this day I use it in my life for all kinds of reasons. Whether it's to prepare for my soccer games, and my soccer league, or to prepare for certain aspects of my life, or the unfolding of a work day. And so I guess you could say I'm believing what I'm preaching or practicing, and then follow it up with the formal training both in school as well as on my own, as well as through the mentorship with my father. And we've been blessed to be able to be published in the field.
Really interesting. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I want to kind of now touch on your teaching aspect of your career. On the Jupiter campus, you teach health psychology, as Amari mentioned. And I was wondering, is there anything you find fulfilling regarding that aspect? I know you shared with your private practice, but now touching on your teaching.
I think it's really expanded a part of me and my practice, because it was my first time teaching it, not maybe within the last couple of years, and I think I've taught it a couple of times now, if I'm not mistaken. And so what it allowed for me was to, and I think in general, this is what teaching really, where it really benefits me, is it forces me to explain what I'm doing. And otherwise, I think a lot of, at least in my experience of being a psychologist, is happening unconsciously, and you just go and you work. And the teaching aspect of it forces me to slow down and um, really piece together the elements of the work. And with health psychology, it really allowed me to reflect on this aspect of my practice. It allowed for me to share with the students, ongoing patients, ongoing cases, and I think it really benefited me and the care of my patients to receive the perspective of students um, on these matters, to talk through issues with them, and to bring all of that to life. And so it was of great benefit to be able to really focus my efforts on health psychology, and I hope it's just enhanced my practice as well as the care of my patients along the way.
Hmm. In your teaching, like, do you bring any of the experience you had from like graduate school when you were pursuing your PhD and your private practice? Is there any way that that might influence the way you teach?
Yes, and in fact, it's as if you were listening in or present in the most recent set of classes with I'm teaching clinical psych this semester, and I brought to the forefront experiences and documents from grad school, and so kind of dusted off some of those documents and shared them with students. And I think what they inform is my process, my writings, my perspective at the time, and what that looked like. And so things that were core values of mine then, clinically and personally, and being able to compare that now, and then to help students to see that this is part of the formation process as undergraduate, graduate, and eventual psychologist. And I think there's a good degree of relevance and overlap between that part of my life and being able to bring it to the classroom and share it with students, and hope that they be able to take something from it.
That's really nice. I now want to touch upon something you mentioned a little bit before. It's regarding research. Do you mind kind of like touching on maybe what your research entails?
So my research has kind of has spanned. It's gone from like me search, which is kind of the joke in graduate school, is research is me search, and starting in undergraduate, my here at the Honors College, my thesis covered a topic of interest to me, which was the relationship between language and perception, and so that's something that I investigated with Dr. Earls, and then completed a continuation of that with her husband, Dr. Kirsten, down at the Boca campus. And then in graduate school, again, a topic that was core to me, which was ethnic identity development and sort of the integration and balancing of multiple aspects of your identity. Um, and then throughout my career, the research opportunities have spanned more they've been more clinical in nature, and so they've been more case studies that have been hopefully informative to the community or the industry about approaches in the care of a patient. They have tended to focus on hypnotic treatments of patients with varying disorders, varying circumstances, and then a couple of those articles have also have been hypnosis that has blended or integrated itself into an existing model. And so, things like, systematic desensitization, which is a behavioral principle, but in what ways can that be applied in a hypnotic approach or in a hypnotic modality? Um, and so I think that's kind of been the arc of thus far of my research, the arc of my involvement in publications, and we will see where I go from here, research wise.
That's exciting though. There's plans. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm open to kind of like now kind of becoming a little more integrated in the honors college, as well as having dear friends that are in the physical therapy realm, just seeing like what opportunities present themselves and taking it from there.
as a follow-up, like, is there anything that really drives you to continue on research? I know like there's the classical like exploration, curiosity, but
Yeah.
is there something that you're like, oh, this is my niche?
The nice thing is that I'm not uh, bound or driven by something like the traditional research professor is it's publish or perish, and so they're driven by real pressures, real deadlines, real financial implications to their work. In my case, because I'm not beholden to that, I think it's more to your point. I think it just kind of what kind of what floats my boat. And if it speaks to me and if it's something that I have the time for and the interest in, like I'll do it. And I think that'll be the criteria. That's been the criteria. The criteria previously, I think, was a little bit more exploratory in nature, as well as like professional development ish in nature. But moving forward, I think it'll be kind of more just curiosity based, and as well as just kind of practical in terms of what will drive my involvement in the next research endeavor.
That's really nice. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
One of my last questions before I hand it off to Pranay is you've mentioned now research. You're also a professor at the Honors College, and you also practice in a private practice. So I'm like, how do you balance it all?
And I
You know,
have
you're like
and
everywhere.
I have a family with three small children, ages 4,
Yeah.
2, and newborn. So if you just eliminate sleep, from your day to day activities, you can do it all. How do I do it all? I've it's it, it's that's a I think it's a fluid process, and um, it's continually moving. I think it's a continual exercise and adaptation, and it's really once I feel that I find that something is I'm managing well the sand shift, and I find that then there's something else to be done and something else that's kind of lacking. And I think it's a continual process that my wife and I are constantly like working through. We're constantly like massaging, whether it's the demands of our children, the needs of our children, our own marital needs, and then our own personal and professional needs. It's it's all at play, and it's I don't really have a good answer. I just think it's we try our damnedest to like do some planning, and then the rest we're kind of like it's on the fly, and it's a moment to moment like process that we're I think it's constantly at the forefront of our experience, and we're still trying to figure it out.
And that's okay. And that's okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. And you guys have been talking about working with research and being a teacher and participating in private practice. But beyond that, you've also been a part of CAPS on the Jupiter campus. And so we were wondering, what was it like working in that department? What was that time like? What did you enjoy? Was there anything that you didn't enjoy? Maybe.
Yeah. I think it was at the right moment in time in my personal and professional development, and so it was about my first 7 years post licensure that I plugged into CAPS, and started out at the Boca campus, the main campus, and I was there for about a year. And much like the hospital experience with internship, to be in a setting with other psychologists, and to be able to be part of team meetings, and to be able to collaborate, and to be able to just talk shop with other professionals. I think I took a lot away from just being able to borrow from, and rub elbows with other psychologists in that setting for a year or two, and then thereafter for the 7 years, give or take. But the first year was in Boca, and then the remaining 5 to 6 years was here on the Jupiter campus. And the experience here in the Jupiter campus, I think, was again a full circle moment in terms of being able to care for Jupiter students, specifically honors college students, and to feel like I could relate, having been an honors college student myself, and a graduate, to be able to relate on that dimension, and to see the honors college community and the honors college student through the lens of a psychologist, and to see what unique issues, unique dynamics they brought to the table. And it tended to be, I think the honors college student as a patient, these are individuals that are highly intelligent, and are accomplished, and are the cream of the crop in terms of their identity as students. But some of them, or a lot of them that came in through my office, where they were experiencing difficulties was in the social and emotional realms. And so they were developed, maybe even overdeveloped intellectually, but relatively speaking, underdeveloped in the social and emotional aspects. And so being able to plug in and to care for them as it related to those aspects of their identity was cool. It was I think it was time well spent. I think it's kind of like any tour of duty. There was just a point where the counseling center was making certain changes administratively and as well in terms of their identity, as was I. And so I think it was just kind of like the appropriate time to conclude things. I it got to a point where I wasn't growing anymore at the counseling center, and I think that suggested to me that it was just time to move on. And so if there was anything that and this was ongoing feedback that I was providing to the counseling center, was if there was anything that I could critique or offer feedback about, is that the psychologist in the counseling center, as long as I was there, was not eligible for tenure, and so they were not held like in the same kind of ranks or esteem as faculty, and so they were categorized as staff, which I think brings certain limitations, as well as kind of practically, like it reduces like the potential for growth, the potential for financial remuneration for the psychologist that's there, and I think it could promote a sort of stagnation. And so I think for those reasons, it concluded when it was supposed to, concluded on good terms. Dear friends with Tui and a lot of the other folk that are there, and it was just kind of just time to move on to the next chapter of life.
Okay, I see. Well, I think it's really cool that you had to have that experience, and yeah. So, but kind of as a follow-up, you were working with a lot of students at FAU, and is there any kind of interaction with a student, like a specific student that stood out to you in particular? Is it something that kind of resonates with you even to this day?
Um, you mean at the counseling center?
Yes.
I think particularly being here at the Honors College campus, I think I had a couple of male patients, male students that I think they connected with me and I connected with them in ways that perhaps they wouldn't have felt as comfortable with the next psychologist. And it's so hopefully I bridged something for them and offered them something unique, in terms of just being able to connect with me as a psychologist, as a male, as a graduate of the Honors College, as somebody that likes to also be playful and to joke around and to have a degree of friendship within the context of the patient psychologist relationship. And so I think those kind of lighthearted encounters, lighthearted elements of the work were the fun of it, and something that just kind of comes to mind as you ask the question.
Okay. Well, that's amazing. Um, Kind of moving on, kind of staying on the topic of CAPS.
Yeah.
As somebody who's worked there for a pretty long time, what do you think are some resources in CAPS or just at FAU in general that you think students underutilize?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think it's socializing students to use CAPS kind of more freely and informally, and more on a consultative basis, which is something that I encourage the entire staff to consider as a model, which is, you go to a hospital setting as a patient, and doctors readily consult with each other as well as come in to consult with patients, and I think the same could apply to CAPS, and that you've got something like upwards of at least a couple of psychologists here at the Jupiter campus. You've got at least a dozen psychologists down in Boca. And for the student to view the CAPS as this resource center where somebody in house has got to be able to, some has got to have some degree of expertise on the topic, on the issue at hand. And so I think normalizing the utilization of CAPS in that way is something that I think that the university or the honors college and CAPS could do a better job of.
Okay. And I think I speak for us all when we say that we agree with you and that counseling should be more freely provided and encouraged. But
Yeah.
shifting from CAPS to, I think, just a more general sort of advice thing, is there any advice that you'd have for college students who are trying, like, when they try to create a balance between school, work, and their social life?
Yeah, I was thinking about this like last night as it related to the kind of general advice to the honors college student is the more that you could conceptualize the honors college as your laboratory where you use it for self-exploration. I think that's the worthwhile use of an honors college experience, and to consider everybody in this world, faculty, staff, students, etc., as part of that for your enhancement. To me, that's a real honors college experience. That's a real honors college formation. Going back to your question about my work here at the counseling center, what concerned me about some of my patients and students at the time was, and this just happens to be an example, and I'm not, I'm not knocking STEM or pre-medicine tracks, but these students happen to be in the STEM program. They happen to be on a pre-medicine track, and what I noticed is they had been on this track their whole life, and they hadn't really explored it. And they talked to me and with this degree of commitment to this track, and they were on the treadmill and they were taking the steps towards getting to medical school, but I could sense that they really hadn't really looked into it. They really hadn't truly discerned it for themselves, and that was concerning. And what worried me for that kind of individual was, well, what's going to become of them down the road when the chickens come home to roost, and they realize that medicine or the practice of a certain aspect of medicine isn't what it's cracked up to be, and that it, just like any profession, it has its downsides. And I feel for that person, and I don't know what becomes of them. And conversely, I just would rather see the honors college student truly sample, truly try stuff, truly rule stuff out, medicine or otherwise. Again, it's the example happened to be STEM, but it could be anything for that matter. And it's just for somebody to go, much like what I shared with you, which was I thought dentistry, and then I went and volunteered with multiple dentists, and I said, oh my goodness, like I do not want to do this for the rest of my life. And that to me is I think as valuable, if not more valuable, than actually like identifying a profession. And kind of along those lines, like in the actual profession, to be able to be around as many professionals as possible, to be able to go, yeah, the psychologist does it this way, and I don't want to do that, or I don't want to be like them. And I think being able to approach your honors college experience with that orientation, to me, that's the best bang for your buck.
All right. So encouraging experimentation and branching out.
Yeah, and as much as it's so that you don't feel like you have to like marry yourself to some major or some topic or some career or profession artificially, but
Okay.
rather it's treated as kind of a fluid process that subject to changing.
All right. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I completely agree with that. Um, and kind of while we're on that topic of advice to people in college right now trying to go on further towards their career, focusing on the field of psychology specifically, seeing as you obviously have a lot of experience in that, do
Yeah.
you have any advice for aspiring psychologists who are still in their undergrad right now?
I think much of the same to really to really experience as much as possible of it, to allow you to discern that if it's for you, um, because just like anything, otherwise, like you might have a notion in your head as to what it is or what it looks like or what it should look like, and rather, I think it's important to really feel like to have an understanding of what the day to day looks like, and that it's more ordinary than not. It's a more ordinary experience than not, and to be able to be okay with that, and to be excited and to find fulfillment in spite of that. And so I think as well as I think to embrace that, it's especially PhD programs and clinical and counseling psych. It's damn competitive, and so you really, if you feel that it's for you, to know that it's a full-fledged commitment. It's, unfortunately it's cutthroat in terms of the competitive nature of it, and that it's going to be a marathon of a sort. You're going to be a professional student, minimum of what, another six to 8 years post undergraduate. And so I think knowing that that's what you're signing up for are important aspects to consider.
Right. So I'd like to hand it over to Amari now. I think
Yeah.
it's time.
First off, I just wanted to say thank you for
Oh,
joining all of us on this
yeah.
interview. We really appreciated talking to you, asking you questions, hearing your responses. Um, I I know for myself it was very insightful to
Oh,
be able to ask all of these questions. Um, but to end it off for like our closing question, is there, I know we just talked about advice, but once again, is there any sort of lesson or mindset that has helped you in your career that you would like to share with students who might listen to?
so in what I found here at the Honors College is that I felt like I was this man on a mission. Um, I just wasn't sure what the mission was, and so I was, I I was just determined, and I persevered, and I tried to find every edge possible, and I really was laser focused as it related to the importance of academics, my grades, and knowing that it was going to translate into something. And it was almost kind of like believing without seeing, for a long time. And so, I think that was, that's what I found. That was what my experience was, as an undergraduate. And then even as once I got accepted to a PhD program, and it was like, kind of like my life is set up in as much as I now have a North Star, um, and that I have a kind of a more defined path and defined identity. The humbling thing is what the carrot that was like dangling in front of me there, which was, well, I'm gonna I'm gonna be trained as a psychologist, and the plan, if you will, was to return back to South Florida to be in private practice. The humbling part of it all was that some of that was partially true, but then it was like kind of the openness to the intangibles, which was, meeting my wife in graduate school. Now, the birth of our three children, being able to come full circle and to be able to teach at the Honors College, being able to work with workers' compensation patients, being able to do some expert witness testimony in the court system, and just, I guess, kind of an openness to, despite thinking that I had a plan or some sort of like vision, that life still throws you curveballs or takes you on different paths, and to be open to that, and realize that the richness of the process is that, and that I hope that's a part of everyone's process, because I think to have it all calculated and to execute it as such is just, I don't know, boring.
Uh, I think that's very, I think that's a very interesting and very nice mentality to have. Openness to the richness, uh, of the deviations of life.
Yeah, because even in the graduate school application process, I thought I was a great fit for the University of Florida. It's where my father did his studies. We had reached out to a couple of faculty members there, and then in the final analysis, they didn't grant me. They neither granted me an interview nor admission, and so I think it showed me that what seemed kind of like straightforward to me and what seemed like kind of the logical path wasn't so. And the reason that I reached out to VCU was the provost at the time was a faculty member on my dad's doctoral dissertation committee. At the time that I was reaching out to him, he was moving on to be a president of a different university. He connected me with the department chair. The department chair connected me with my soon-to-be advisor, who was still a graduate student at UCLA. So long story short is like kind of the universe revealed to me and like started moving me towards like kind of like the least expected set of possibilities, which actually ended up being what was best for me. And so I guess it's my long-winded way of saying, if you can tolerate that, if you can be open to all of that insanity, I think that's where the fun is.
I have a saying. I was like, everything in life always happens for a reason. So maybe it was meant to be, you know?
That's what I believe, and it just was meant to be in a way that I never would have conceived. Not in my wildest dreams did I think that it would be meant to be in that way. I'm the one, I think, human being on this earth that gets to tout that his wife knocked on his front door. So for as much as I talk to patients day in, day out about, you got to get off the couch and you got to get out there and connect and date, so on and so forth. Well, not me. Like I was studying for my comprehensive exams in graduate school, and I hear my door knock, and I go downstairs and I open the door, and it's my across the street neighbor, who is my now wife, and she asked me to help her move some furniture. And I was annoyed as all hell because I was studying and I didn't want to be bothered. And she was making overtures and being flirty with me, and I wanted nothing to do with it. And anyway, that obviously changed, and the rest was history. But again, like, how in a million years could I have ever forecasted any of this? And so I think it's this ultimate blessing that you just gotta, I think, just gotta remain open to and grateful for, and try to just kind of do your part, and then let the universe take care of the rest.
Yeah. It's like a movie almost. Like you just gotta watch it play out. Or rather experience it play out.
Right, right.
Okay. I just want to thank you again on behalf
Yeah,
of all of us and also on behalf of our entire FAU Thrive team. We truly appreciate all your insights, all your advice, all your stories. They were really fun to listen to. Um, and thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time out of your day.
of
We truly
course.
appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Thank you for including me, and whatever Thrive needs from me, whatever you all individually need from me, as well as whatever the listening audience needs from me. Just holler. You have me here.
Thank you so much. We really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Dr. Iglesias.
All right, guys.
I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. You too. Good speaking
Thank
with you
you.
guys.
All right,
Bye.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.
bye.